All right.
I feel like I need some pump up Beyonce or something like, oh. All right, we're going to give everybody a second to join in on our live today. And we're just going to make sure that we are streaming across all channels. The amazing team at CMHA has pulled together some incredible panelists that I get to speak with today. I'm going to wait for them to give me the green light so that we can start this conversation. And while we're waiting, if everyone who is joining in could just take a second to say hi, introduce yourself, tell me your name, where you're tuning in from. And I want to keep this conversation really engaged today. We're going to have a lot of fun. So I'm going to encourage you right off the bat, when you hear something that resonates, when you hear something where you're like, yes, he or she is speaking my language, I want you to put in a little boom into the chat so that you know, so that I know that you're still with us, so that we're all having this conversation together. And you can just write a big old boom in there, and that will let me know that you are picking up what we're putting down. So if we have not met, my name is Erin Treloar. I'm a health coach. I'm a mom of two. I'm a wife, and I'm a founder of a company called Raw Beauty Co. I ask people questions for a living, and I help people really identify how to feel good in their unique body and get aligned with that. And I am so excited to have three absolutely incredible human beings here today to join me for a conversation about mental health. We're going to dig into some tools that these individuals have used as we have been navigating the most insane year I think a lot of people have experienced in a long time. So I've got a couple questions for you right now. And maybe my panel, you could just put up your hand if any of these resonate for you, okay? So, and for everyone who's listening again, hit me with the boom. Put up your hand or give me a boom if you have found that you were a little bit more anxious in 2020. A bit more anxious. Put up your hand if you have found that your motivation has been a little bit like this. Hi, we're back up. And then like, it's hard to get out of bed. Yeah, I'm right there with you. Put up your hand if you have felt overwhelmed at times. Put up your hand if you felt depressed in moments. Put up your hands if you felt angry in moments. Yeah. Yeah. Asante with both hands up over there. Yeah, 2020 has been an incredibly emotional roller coaster. And along with that, our mental health has been most likely on a ride. And so today we're going to check in with everybody to see how they've been navigating 2020 so far. These three individuals have graciously offered to step up and to share their truth, their resources, little bits and pieces of wisdom that they've gathered along the way. I'm going to encourage you to ask them questions as we're going through things so that we can keep things super engaged. When it comes to mental health, I know that's a lot of shame around it, and that shame can be debilitating and isolating and painful. I know this from my own journey. And my hope is that in hearing the stories of the lovely individuals who are here today, that you will feel a little less alone in your own journey, and that our conversation today will shine some light into those dark corners where shame really lives and thrives. Because I truly believe that your mental health struggle can become your greatest strength. And I have three individuals here today to show you that this is true. It does not have to define you. So without further ado, let me introduce them to you. I want to start off by introducing you to Asante Haughton. Can you give us a wave, Asante? There he is. Asante is a two-time TEDx speaker. He's a poet, positive force of nature when it comes to social change, equity, and mental health. He is a poet, a thinker, a researcher, and a speaker. And we're going to dive into things with him. Jenni, Jenni Davies, can you give us a wave? Jenni is a creative storyteller. She's a podcast host. She's tuning in all the way from Mexico right now, a little place called Sayulita. And Jenni is an incredible mental health advocate who has a super inspiring story. So we're going to dig in with her. And then we've got Zeinab. Khawaja. I practiced this like 500 times before. I knew I was going to get tripped up on it. So Zeinab works with the team at the Canadian Mental Health Association. She is always pushing for progress, using her voice to talk about important messages, and has experience working as a peer supporter. She works directly with Peer Support Canada. Thank you, all of you, so much for being here. If you're on mute, can you come off mute?
Yeah, thank you.
I've had enough of my voice. I want to hear from you individuals. Asante, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going to start off with you.
All right, let's do it.
Let's do it. I have a really simple but very complicated question for you. And the team at the Canadian Mental Health Association is doing this incredible campaign right now, encouraging people to #GetReal about their mental health and their state. How are you doing?
That's a great question. 2020 has definitely been I don't know what to call it, a ride or roller coaster, but it's been something. How am I doing right now today? I'm doing pretty good. But that's to say, that not every day has been good throughout 2020. Many of them were not great. I'm just kind of getting my physical health back together after, I kind of went through the COVID thing myself. So that took, right.
You did?
Yeah. So that took a toll on my body, and I'm just kind of getting it all back in order. But I don't like to talk about it that much because it was hard. I'm really grateful to be regaining my health and starting to feel like normal again. And but there's still a lot going on in the world, a lot going on at work, a lot going on, in my social circles everywhere. So it's easy to get overwhelmed. It's easy to take on too much. And I just took the last weekend to unplug. So apologies to anyone who's been trying to DM me or send me an email. I had to take that time to try to get myself together. But I do feel good today.
Good. I'm so glad that you mentioned that you took some time to just shut off, because I'm hearing from a lot of people that I work with that they're reaching this point where the anxiety, the overwhelm, like their system, their nervous system feels like it's starting to shut down. And so I think can be incredibly important for our mental health. It doesn't mean that we stop doing this important work, but we also have to know when it's time to just take a break. I'm so happy to hear that you're healthy after going through COVID. And how did you find that whole experience? I know you just said you don't want to talk about it too much, so we won't go too deep into it, but how did you find that impacted your mental health?
Oh, it was terrible. Right.
Yeah.
And, I think the biggest challenge for me is that, you're going through this thing where, every day the information is different. We're learning about, what COVID is and how it affects you every single day. And, you hear all these stories about weird and strange things happening to people with their symptoms. And, it's scary to hear that. And, you're lying in bed all day for, 2 straight weeks, trying to, you don't know how it's going to go for you.
Right. Right.
Then the news cycle, everything, Twitter, Instagram, social media, all of it was just, everything's COVID, and you can't really get away from it. So it really forced me to exercise, a lot of how I dealt with triggers before had to do with just trying to avoid them. And now I was put in a situation where I couldn't avoid them. And I had to really figure out how I was going to manage and really deal with the stress of being triggered when it happened, because it was happening every single day. And, I was able to, figure out some strategies around that. Maybe we'll talk about that a bit later, but I don't want to take up too much time right now. But it was really tough. And yeah, you hear about the coughing and the fever and all that stuff. I had some other symptoms like, they talk about the frostbite symptoms and that kind of thing. And that happened to my hands. So all the skin on my hands, like, really essentially burned to a crisp and like peeled off.
Wow.
So really strange things were happening. So yeah, it was scary. But I think the positive for me is that going through that really put a lot of things into perspective around what to be grateful for, and maybe things that I was paying attention to that maybe didn't require as much mental energy as I was giving it. And it also forced me to stop reading about COVID all the time, because that's what I was doing.
Of course you were. Yeah. I mean, that's totally fair and valid that you were trying to navigate what was happening to you. I think we were all getting caught in the clickbait of every single heading and news line, and whether it was real or not real. It can be, terrifying. And then exactly as you said, when you're in this space of isolation, which so many people were faced with, a lot of the tools as individuals who have perhaps struggled with mental health, a lot of those tools that we learn over time to help us navigate it were taken away. The connection, the ability to move our bodies, the work that we're doing. So I'm curious to know, and don't worry, I've got a lot of time for the other girls as well. You're not taking up too much space. For you, what are some of those tools or practices that help you so that you're not so triggered?
That's a great question. I think one of the big things for me was actually talking about my triggers as they were happening with my wife. So she was a huge support throughout everything. Another thing was, starting to move my body once I physically started to feel, more and more better. Writing was a huge thing for me too. I wrote a whole lot. Anyone who's been through my Instagram lately will kind of see what was going on there, and you could kind of like walk through my experience and how it's been for me. So that was definitely something that I was doing. I was writing poetry. I wrote a couple of raps because I grew up doing that kind of thing. And yeah, I was really, what was interesting, I returned to my child self. And I started doing all the things that brought me joy when I was a kid. And that was writing. And that was, spitting some bars and doing that. That was, playing video games, and joking around with my friends. And that's kind of really what I returned to, when just figured out a way to really connect with people, even though we're physically disconnected. I definitely was reaching out to folks, or when I needed to, taking that time for myself and just reading a lot, which is another thing that I did a lot when I was a youngster. So
I love this point of going back to the things that brought you joy, the things that brought you calm and comfort as a child. And I think that's something that everyone can take a moment to reflect on right now, is what were those things before all the responsibilities of life and adulthood came into play that helped you connect to yourself? And are there ways for you to connect back to those things, whether it's daily or weekly, but are you creating space for that? I love that. Thank you so much for sharing that. And for anybody who wants to follow Asante, you can find him at nerdy.black.guy.
Instagram.
Insta, get on over, follow him over there. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to be back to you in a second. Jenni, can you, for a moment, get real and tell me, how are you doing?
How am I doing? Well, I'd say the first thing is my experience over the last couple of months has been probably a lot different than most of the people who are listening today. My partner and I decided to go on a 2-year travel the world and work from remotely. And we started that in February, right, like the end of February.
Right before.
Exactly, like literally right before. And at the time, I mean, I don't even recall hearing too much about anything in the news, because we would have like thought about it a little bit more, but instead it was, I think we flew into Mexico, like the 28th or something of February. We landed in a little town called Bucerias. It's just outside of Puerto Vallarta on the west coast of Mexico. And we were there for 2 weeks when everything just started to, hit the news, hit everyone's psyche, and it was just crazy. So we were getting calls and texts and emails forwarded over and over and over by my partner's mom, just being like, you need to come home, here's some stats, this is what's going to happen. And it was really scary. I mean, there was, not only was there the intense pressure to return, but there was, people were hoarding food and things like that back home, and there was nothing happening here yet. And it was just strange to know this was all happening, but also not feeling it physically in our space where we were. So that was really strange. And then, there's a lot of uncertainty there. So we'd be like, it's fine. We've decided we're just going to stay anyway. If it gets worse, we'll think about coming home. And then, a week would go by, and then it would be like, we'd sit down and have another conversation. Is this the smart decision? What are we being stupid? Like, what's happening here? I mean, they were talking about closing the borders. And then I was a mess at that time. My anxiety was through the roof. I was depressed. And I was also, the other thing is, a lot of our friends were losing their jobs, or, I work in the creative space and we run a marketing agency. And so we had a lot of, friends who were also in the industry who suddenly lost their entire clientele overnight. Yeah. And then they were contacting us being like, hey, do you have work? And so there was a lot of like, oh my God, like we didn't know what to do. So when we finally made the decision to stay, things got a lot better, because it was like, okay, at least we've made this decision. Yeah. We decided to go up to Sayulita, which is a little bit further from Bucerias. It's a little tiny town with like 3,000 people. It's known for surfing. And 2 or 3 days later, they shut the town down. So you weren't allowed in or out. And it's been like that since end of March. And it just opened up again about 2 weeks ago. So you couldn't go out or in. If you did try to, like, the National Guard would stop you, or they tell you they're taking photos and you're not allowed to come back if you do go. So we were like literally stuck here. Now, there was some beauty with that. I mean, there was not a single case that came through here, but at the same time, there was a lot of strangeness going on. There was, nobody was wearing masks and nobody was social distancing. And I think it's a bit of a cultural thing, but it was also everyone felt safe here. Just because of the town being closed off, right? Yeah. So it was really difficult for us to navigate what was appropriate or what was safe, because we never have, none of us had anywhere to base it from. I mean, that's a universal experience, right? We usually decide or make decisions about how to act or how to behave or what to do based on our personal experiences, but no one's ever really experienced anything like this, at least that are alive today.
No. Yes.
So yeah, that's how it started. I mean, we were in this little bubble. It was beautiful, wonderful to be here. But one of the other kind of complicated things that kind of kept coming up for me was I felt a lot of guilt about how everyone was having such a hard time back home. While yes, there was still a lot of emotional stuff to navigate here. I mean, we were in a beautiful place, sunny. The beaches were closed, but you could still go watch the sunset from the edge of the beach, So
how did you find, because you've had your own struggles with mental health and even your sobriety journey, can you tell everyone who's tuned in right now a little bit more about your own journey? And I'm curious to know how you navigated that in these times of extreme uncertainty, when you, as you said, there were a lot of triggers popping up for you.
Yeah. Well, I guess a little bit about my story. About 6 years ago now, maybe before, a little bit. Yeah, around 6 years ago, I guess I kind of hit like rock bottom for myself. I was I was struggling with a lot of addiction issues. I was super depressed. I had a undiagnosed mood disorder that I wasn't aware of. And my anxiety was like, I was having panic attacks multiple times a day, and I was dumped, evicted, and lost my job in the same week. And I was like, okay, life's going to start over. But at that time, I kind of came to a place where I realized that if I didn't make a decision, I wouldn't probably live throughout the year. I wouldn't make it out of the year alive. And so I was like, what are my choices? Either I'm not going to continue with my life, or I'm going to. And I said, that's it. So I started getting help. I started seeing a psychologist. I started actively trying to do things that made me feel self-worth, because that was the biggest thing for me, is I didn't see any worth in myself. So learning about how to enforce boundaries or do things that I felt proud of instead of disgusted in. Because if you have disgust towards yourself, it's a really, really strong, terrible emotion and toxic emotion. So bringing that back to, I guess about a year after all that happened, I decided to quit drinking, which was another big decision, but it's been probably the best decision I ever made in my life, just because it didn't mix well with me, and it helped me get a lot of clarity about a lot of some of the traumas I had in my past that I wasn't able to really deal with because they kept running away. So that was really good for me. And then I guess tying it back into what's going on now, I felt super unsettled a lot. The uncertainty was a huge trigger. One of the biggest reasons why I've recovered or healed so well, as whatever that means, is that I have routines that I stick to, and my routines are everything for me, especially because I experience a lot of highs and lows. And so one of the things that I've always said and repeated to myself, and it's a strategy I still use through at this time, was remembering that I am not my feelings. And so I'm allowed to have feelings, and I'm allowed to look at them and acknowledge them, and hi, little feelings, there you are, I see you, okay? But that also doesn't mean that I am those. So I was allowed to sit with them for a while, but then when push comes to shove, you get up and you do your life, and it forces you back into feeling good again, just by whatever that term, I don't even know what the term is for it, but it's just, by kind of faking it till you make it, right?
So do you find, like, if I love what you're saying right now, and I want to dive a little bit deeper into this specifically, and I'm curious to know, Zeinab and Asante as well, if you have any tips or tricks around this area as well. So this idea of I am not my feelings, I think that this is one of the most challenging things to really wrap your head around and then to start embodying, because when you are feeling anxious or lonely or rage or sadness, it can feel all encompassing. And so often we see these little like quotes on Instagram or whatever, like, you choose your mood, and like stand in front of the mirror and just say, I'm happy, I'm love, I'm bold. And for anybody who's been in that space where you're depressed or anxious or feeling whatever, like, that can be the most frustrating thing to hear. So I'm curious to know, how do each of you move from a space where you're like, this is not comfortable, I'm not like loving this mood that I'm in or this emotion that I'm feeling, into a new space? How do you actually, I know this is not easy stuff, but actually start to shift the emotion?
I have a lot of thoughts and feelings about this, so I'll jump in first. And I don't know if this is what you'll want to hear, but for me, it depends on the situation. But for me, initially, you do have to lean into that discomfort. At least a little bit, like that. You have to acknowledge what's there and validate those feelings. Like, for example, anger is a really uncomfortable feeling for me. I don't like being an angry person, and I don't consider myself an angry person, but like, you feel it at some times. It's a normal human emotion. And sort of framing that as, this is an understandable response to something that's going on. It's telling me something, and it's an okay feeling, and like leaning into, okay, what am I angry about? What is this telling me about the situation that I'm in, or what's going on in my life? And just sitting in the sometimes aggressive discomfort of that feeling. And exploring that when it's in a safe sort of environment to explore that. Sometimes you do sort of need to acknowledge when it's getting super, super overwhelming, and sort of try and do whatever it takes to ground yourself, and distract, or whatever helps you kind of calm back to an emotional level where you're able to lean into it.
Love that.
So it's not always like lean into it, no matter how aggressively uncomfortable it is. Like, recognizing when it's too much for you to handle, and too much isn't a bad thing. Everyone has that threshold. But recognizing when you're getting there, to allow yourself to step back, but not just blanketly avoiding it, I guess. And
love that.
So leaning into it can look differently for different people. For me, it's often a lot of journaling. Asante, when you mentioned poetry, I'm like, yes, Poetry is a big thing for me too. I like to write. What I tell my friends is my angsty poetry, though it's not. And I message my friends all the time. I'll literally message them being like, help, I'm sad. And then they'll just talk about, they'll be like, what's up? And I'll just vent and send a wall of text or have a phone call with someone and just talk about how I'm feeling. And I think that's important to sort of acknowledge it and not just hope it goes away or pretend it's not there. Yeah.
So writing, you mentioned, talking about it. I would probably put therapy in that category.
That's a big one.
I know for me personally, I reached a point like you were talking about where I couldn't meditate or exercise or eat healthy foods in order to change the level of anxiety I had. And I actually had to choose medication to help me get up to that point that you were speaking about. And I think that's a tool that a lot of us can carry a lot of shame around. And so I wanted to bring it up today because, as you can see here, there's 4 different individuals who are in 4 different parts of the world right now. We all look different. We all have completely different stories, but mental health is something that can impact anybody, everybody, no matter where you come from or what you look like. And so I think that the more that we can have these conversations about the tools that we use, which can be universally applied, the better. So I love that. So you're saying lean into the feeling, let yourself feel the anger or the sadness. And then, okay, I've been sad for X amount of period of time, and I'm starting to feel like I might have a bit of will to allow that emotion to move. Any suggestions on how we take the next step?
I think, yeah.
No, you go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just talked.
I was trying to pass it off.
Asante, I'll ask you this.
Yeah.
You're lying in bed with COVID. You're navigating Black Lives Matter as a Black man.
Yeah.
Are you in Canada or you're in Canada?
I'm in Toronto. Yeah.
You're in Toronto. Okay. So you're in this space where I can only imagine you're navigating a lot of intense emotions and on this path here, right?
Yes.
Are you finding any levels of joy, happiness, love right now, or like where are you at?
Yeah, I would say yes, I am, and for me, I have to manufacture that from myself. And like Zeinab was saying, the first step for me is to, recognize what's happening inside of my body. And, lately I've been really thinking about, we don't necessarily teach children how to do that from a young age, is, how to recognize what's happening inside of you and then, be able to identify it so then we can do something about it. And that's something I'm only, getting better at, I won't say how old I am, but I'm getting up there. But with that being said, that's really been important for me because, a big thing for me that I live by is once you identify something, then you could work on that thing that you identify. Right? So for me, it's about first identifying it, trying to remove the shame from whatever it is I'm experiencing, and then kind of saying, okay, this is what's happening. And also recognizing that I have gone through pain and suffering before, and I've come out of it. And so that helps me to kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel. It helps me to maintain hope. And then that puts me in a position of, okay, it's not going to be this way forever. However, what can I do to, help get the steam engine moving, kind of thing. So, yeah, and, all those things I was saying earlier were a big part for me. The first thing I started doing was writing, and I was writing, like, a lot. Only a few things made it to social media, but there's a lot that, is in my phone, sheets of paper all over the house. It's a mess.
But, you've got that beautiful mind thing going on where it's like plastered all over the walls, the mind of Asante.
That's exactly it. So I would say that's the first thing for me. And yeah, really understanding that, like Jenni was saying, is that you have to have a routine. And for me, part of that routine was manufacturing joy in my life. So, when I was watching, the protests go down on CNN when everything all started, I was like, I need to turn this off and I need to, go do something that's going to bring light into my soul. And, it could be something as juvenile as, turn on the PS4 and I play some video games, or have a deep conversation with my wife about something, or you know, I reminisce with my brother about the Raptors winning the championship last year. You know, all that, whatever it may be.
Take us back.
So,
I love this idea of manufacturing joy, because I think this concept and the perfect words to explain it has been something so pivotal for me in my own journey, is understanding that these feelings that we hope for, whether that's joy or love or connection, that oftentimes it's not as simple as them just landing in our lap. We have to look for them. We actually have to actively pursue those things. And the first step in doing that really is identifying, what are the things that bring me joy? What are the things that make me feel a little bit lighter? Jenni, what were you going to say?
Yeah, on that note, I was just going to say, so first of all, the fact that there's 3 poets here at least, unless Erin, you're also a poet, it's quite amusing. That never happens. Who writes poetry? Right?
I mean, I don't know if you, I actually have written poetry, but let me tell you, it will never make it to Instagram or anywhere public.
Okay, well, listen, so my thoughts were a couple of things. They all revolve around writing. So like Asante was saying, I also write. I spend a lot of time writing as a means of being able to get my feelings out on paper. But 2 other things that I was doing over the last period of time, and in other times in my life where I've had a rough time, is one, pulling up, like looking at something on Google that has a list of feelings, like all kinds of describing words, and identifying what feeling it is that I'm feeling. Because if you can get specific enough about a word or about what that feeling is, you end up being able to figure out where it came from, and then maybe potentially being able to do something about it. Another thing is, I have a little notepad pinned in my phone where I write down, there's 10 things that I know make me feel better. Things like drinking water, stretching, you know, whatever those things are. And I usually don't even think about it until I'm in what I would call the depths of despair. And, you know, when you're laying there and the depression is really bad, or the anxiety is just really overwhelming, and I can't use my usual willpower to pop out of it, I'll pull up that list and I'll try. My goal for the day is just to do one of those things. Yeah. You know, even if it's go lay on my yoga mat and just imagine I'm doing yoga. Those, just 1 or 2 of those things just improve, as you were saying, manufacture happiness, because I know those are the things that make me feel good, and those are the things that make me feel happy. Yeah. So
I love that, Jenni. I call that my personal nourishment menu.
Oh, I love it.
And I would encourage anyone who's listening right now, tell us, what are 1 or 2 things that you would put on your personal nourishment menu? I'll go through the group. So Jenni, you just mentioned yoga, drinking water. Zeinab, what would you put on your personal nourishment menu?
I have a lot of things. I've been playing a lot of ukulele. Since COVID hit, I learned a bunch of songs to play. I wanted to get a guitar, but I have small hands, so the ukulele works better. So that's perfect. Fun. Like sometimes I'll call a friend and I'll be like, let me serenade you.
It's amazing.
And it's just a lot of fun. I also took boxing classes back in undergrad, just like very briefly. I absolutely loved it, but I wasn't able to keep up with it. And so at the beginning of sort of all the lockdown stuff in March, I bought a pair of gloves, and something that's very embarrassing. It's this band that goes around your head and it has like a little rubber ball attached to it. And you can practice your reflexes and your reactivity with boxing. So you look kind of foolish if anyone's watching you, but it's a super fun workout, and it's something that I can do while sitting and watching Netflix or standing up and things like that. So that's one of my favorite things, as well as
hey, you have to send us the link for this, because this doesn't sound ridiculous. It sounds amazing. Like, why does all of us should receive one of these from the government, I think, so that we can process emotions, not even having to leave our room.
Yeah, no, it's a lot of fun for sure, but it's definitely also easy to hit yourself in the face. So like that does inevitably happen. There's a lot of videos of me smacking myself in the face. Oh my
gosh, you're hilarious. I love it.
Yeah, and then I also just really like to go to, I love water, bodies of water, baths, like anything with water. And so I recently moved in the middle of the pandemic to an area that's very close to the Bayfront here in Hamilton, Ontario. So we're right by the water. And so sometimes at night, if I'm feeling super anxious, I just need to get out of the house. Like I'll just walk to the water and I'll just sit on the water's edge and I'll just stare out at this expanse of nature. And it's just so calming. It's one of the things that almost instantly brings me to the present and just grounds me in a way that breathing techniques don't always do. It's just being there, being surrounded by nature is just so grounding for me.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. I love that, adding nature to the list. I'm currently writing an entire list of tools for everyone, which I'll share over on our social media page. And I'll make sure that the team at CMHA has a PDF of this as well, so that we can get it out to everyone, sort of summarizing all the tools that everyone's sharing. Asante, what are you putting on your personal nourishment menu other than PlayStation and writing?
I feel like I already gave you a bunch.
I'm going to keep digging. I want your whole list by the end of this.
Let's go in. Zeinab, it's funny you said about the boxing. That's been something that I've been doing a little bit of in the house as well. Just the shadow boxing or whatever. Yes. So that's been keeping me going. But I'll give you two more, Erin.
Yes.
To make sure it's fresh.
I'm here for it.
Right. Laughter is a huge thing for me. So definitely firing up the Netflix and, the stand-up comedies and just allowing myself to release that way. So that's a huge thing for me. And, being able to, spend some quiet time with myself has also been huge for me. My schedule is generally filled with everything under the sun. And I've been really prioritizing quiet time, and very much like Zeinab, nature is big for me, but with everything that's happening in Toronto right now, that hasn't always been super easy. But still trying to go for walks in our green spaces here in Toronto, that's also been a pretty big deal for me over the last little while. So I think I gave you 3 there, Erin.
You did. Thank you. You are off the hook. You no longer have to share any more tools today unless any come to your mind. It's so interesting because we've got 3 women here and then Asante over there. I think self-care for women is much more accepted and talked about. Like, it's so within our DNA to talk about, doing yoga and getting a latte with a friend and talking and doing therapy and on a lot of these practices, because I think women tend to talk about this stuff more than men do. Or maybe that's not accurate. Asante, do you think that the dialogue between men in regards to self-care and mental health and wellness, that it's as present?
That's hard to say. The thing is that a lot of my homies, they're kind of, into the same things that I'm into, right? So, but at the same time, I have a lot of friends that are not in the mental health and wellness space either. And, ain't nobody talking about self-care. We don't do that, right? But the thing is, we're not using that language, but we are actually, we're doing it by virtue of, connecting. And, guys, we kind of, we make fun of each other and we do that. And, we have, I'm in several different group chats with, different groups of guy friends, and, different things are happening where we just kind of find ways, we send memes to each other to laugh. And, I think for us, it's not necessarily about, talking deeply about our emotions. Well, sometimes it is, but, probably less common than, how women are doing it. But that being said, we are finding ways to still make meaningful connections to each other. And I think sometimes we create this narrative that guys don't do that, and guys do that. It's just, it looks different.
It's different. Right. And as you're saying this, I'm thinking about my husband. I'm like, oh, that's what he's doing with all those memes. Or when he goes and has to play golf and gets out on his mountain bike and things with his buddies. It's just a different way of decompressing and connecting. And, so I like how you shared that. It's not that it's not happening. The language around it is a little bit different.
I think it's also important to mention that for women, a lot of the self-care is commercialized. So it's not necessarily the same. It's not actually necessarily more, although I would agree that there's with what Asante said, But I think it's just important to remember that a lot, like going and get your nails done and hair and things like that. Not that that's a problem, but it's not, that may not be self-care for a lot of women, or not, it may not be impactful self-care.
Right. If for me, it feels like it's more of a chore, whereas self-care, but I would put something like having a massage for sure as a certain kind of self-care. What I really think of self-care, I'm like, that's when I go to therapy. Self-care was making the really hard decision to take medication and to start talking about the fact that I do. Like, that's the deep self-care that I find has really allowed myself to start showing up and showing up authentically as myself. The other stuff is nice and it feels good to get a massage and have a latte with a girlfriend, but it's really understanding that there's, you know, there's different tools and different moments for sure.
Yeah. And I mean, oh, sorry, please go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. No, yeah, just to further, like, talking about pushing the boundaries of what we define as self-care, I think, as we've kind of mentioned, it looks different for everyone. And I think, yeah, you mentioned therapy, and I think it looks different for everyone, but also for me, it looks different on different days. And it's not always doing something. Sometimes it's allowing myself to not do things is self-care. Sometimes canceling plans is self-care. Sometimes being able to get out of bed and take a shower is as much self-care as you can manage in a day. Sometimes eating 2 meals in a day, at least, is self-care. Sometimes ordering pizza for dinner because you know you're not going to cook is self-care. Yeah. So it's whatever you need to do to sort of give your body what you need to sort of get through the day sometimes. And so I think, especially when you think about people with, like for me, I have experiences with, I have a history of trauma as a survivor of sexual assault, and self-care for me looks very different on different days, depending on how that is showing up for me in a given day. So yeah, just broadening that out a little bit. And I would say that, you know, moving beyond the gender binary, people of all genders experience self-care differently and experience comfort or discomfort with talking about self-care. Like, as much as there's a lot of toxic masculinity that makes it sort of harder for men to, in society, structurally talk about their emotions and feelings, it's also just sort of like society in general, like, as much as we say, oh, it's easier for women to talk about their feelings, etc., but like, is it? Because we're called hysterical, or we're called emotional, or we're oversharing, or we're attention seeking, or we're doing this or that. So I'd say, as much as, yes, toxic masculinity is a thing that impacts men and trans men and masculine presenting folk, I think for all of us, there's still stigma that exists to the point where we were defining self-care as going to yoga and things like that. And we're not talking about some of those harder, less commercialized or less pretty versions of self-care.
Yeah. That's so well said, and very poignant. So thank you for sharing that. And, you know, anybody who's listening right now, I would encourage you to just take a moment to reflect on self-care and what you consider that to be as an individual, and what that looks like for you in this moment of time. And perhaps because 2020 is providing us with so many opportunities for growth and so many triggers, that this is actually a really beautiful time to dig into a little bit deeper, what could self-care look like for you? And to know that if you're struggling right now, if you're in that space of not being able to get out of bed, or having to order pizza every night just to get some food in your body, and that counts too, that counts too, and that is enough. I feel sometimes, as you're saying, Jenni, with the commercialization of self-care, that we can get these long lists that almost add more stress of all the things we should be doing, and the green juice and the essential oils and the yoga. And like, I got to send this, and I got to laugh, and I got to tune off of social media, but not too long, because I should really be on there, and I need to know every single thing that's happening right now.
I'll let you in on a secret. I used to work out 4 or 5 days a week. And when COVID hit, I think I've worked out 4 times since COVID hit. So
yeah,
I still feel like I'm doing okay. And that's what matters to me, even if my routine went out the window.
Yeah. Amazing.
For me, if in the most basic sense, if I'm defining self-care, it's being kind to yourself and being your own best friend. And whatever that means to you, it means forgiving yourself for not doing your nourishment list of things, forgiving yourself for not getting out of bed in a day, forgiving yourself for not being as productive at work as you want it to be. It's just doing whatever you need to do to be kind to yourself and be gentle with yourself and be loving and nurturing to yourself and reparenting yourself and doing all those pieces. So yeah, the most simplest way that I like to frame it in mind is just, what do I need to do to be kind to myself today?
Yeah. I'm hearing so much about taking that quiet time, the self-reflection, the introspective work, understanding yourself as an individual, and also this other piece about talking to somebody, to sharing, whether that's with a friend. Have any of you done therapy?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Would anybody be open to speaking about your experience with therapy? Again, I think that this is something that's really changing nowadays, but there's still a lot of fear around this whole concept and that you're broken or wrong if you have to go through it. So maybe Asante, starting with you, what has your experience been like?
Oh, man. I would say life-saving and life-changing. And, going back to what Zeinab was just saying, I think for me, the biggest piece was learning how to love myself. And, a large part of that was letting go of the guilt of, not necessarily, sometimes when you're a kid, it's like you develop this image of who you're going to be as you hit high school and then young adulthood and adulthood. And it's like, none of that worked out the way it was supposed to. So it's like, then I had all this guilt about, oh man, I'm supposed to do this, and I'm supposed to do that, and this was supposed to happen. And, as my mom would say, I was shooting on myself all the time, right? And my therapist really helped me to understand, and contextualize all the things that have happened in my life. And, if I struggled, socially at a particular point in times, like, well, I was, super depressed for 8 years. And, my mom was in the hospital, and I was struggling with I was living in poverty and all these different things that were happening. It's like, I didn't have time to focus on making friends because I was focused on survival, right? Yeah. So, really allowing, I think a big thing that happens with folks is we feel guilty for the ideal self that we think we should be, and don't feel that we are. And therapy for me was really allowing myself to become comfortable with who I was and understand that I had value, a tremendous amount of it, just by walking the path that I did walk. And, really leaning into that and not, if I had to mourn the loss of the ideal person, that's cool. But who am I now? And, well, look what I'm doing. It's like, maybe this is, the way it worked out is better than, what I imagined from my ideal self. That's neither here nor there. I know there's a lot of privilege in me saying that right now, being in a good place. But really, therapy for me really helped me to, I felt like I was spinning for a very long time, and therapy helped me essentially, set the compass in the right direction so I could move toward self-compassion, self-love, and then knowing who I was, it made it easier for me to be who I wanted to be.
Yeah. Wow. So well said. Were you resistant at all to going to that first session, or were you like, game on, bring it on, therapy's where it's at, I'm so pumped for this whole experience, this is going to be amazing? Like, where was your head at when you started?
I was like, I don't want to do this. That's where I was
100%.
Yeah. And, there was a lot embedded in that. There was obviously, shame, and it was the shame of admitting that, something was quote unquote wrong with me, that, I had all these like things swimming around my head that were really, I don't know if these are society's ideas, but they were things that somehow got downloaded into my head. I was weak, I was soft, I was, all these toxic masculinity things, that was in my head. The other piece was, growing up, Black people don't go through that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. So that was another piece that, and, I'm Jamaican background. So there was all like in Jamaican male culture, it's like the machismo level is like up here times 1,000, and so yeah. It's like I wasn't living up to that. And there was all these pieces. Plus the added effect was, I growing up impoverished in Toronto, you know, being a black man in a society that, you know, there's a lot of challenges in being a black man dealing with racism and things like that. I wasn't sure that my experience was going to, I wasn't sure I was going to be able to talk about it with the level of honesty that I needed to. And I wasn't sure that I would be understood the way that I needed to be understood in order to move forward in the process. And I say that because, you know, it took a while for me to get the right therapist. You know, I first tried it when I was 16 and I got the right one when I was 22. So
it's like dating. It's like dating. You got to shop around. You can't expect the right fit with the first person.
It took a long time to get to the wedding ring, you know what I'm saying? But being real, it is very similar, right? And, you know, and it's funny, you know, people might assume that, it wasn't a black therapist that ended up being the right one for me. And that's not saying anything about black therapists. But what I'm saying is that, you know, it was a white lady. You know, she was, you know, probably in her 40s at the time. And but what really made it work for me was that she allowed me to bring my humanity into the room without judgment. And she was also bringing her humanity into the room at the same time. And I know that oftentimes within the field, we're trained to not necessarily do that as much. But I really think it's important to build that relationship for the therapist to also, you know, bring their humanity into the space. And that doesn't necessarily mean that she was telling me her life story, but, you know, she would fly off the handle. Well, not fly off the handle, but she would like swear, and it's essentially not put on the guise of, you know, professionality.
Yeah.
And that as a young adult, as a male, that really said to me that, okay, this is someone real. This is someone that I can talk to. And so now me being in the field, that's kind of the approach I've developed, where I'm going to bring my real self into my appointment with another young person, because I understand that helps to build that bridge where we could walk across it from either end and meet in the middle.
Love that. Love that so much. Zeinab, I'm conscious of the time here, but I wanted to swing things over to you because I know you've had a similar experience with finding your own therapist and then working in peer support for so long. Yeah. So I'm curious to know about your journey.
Yeah, for sure. So I worked in peer support all through my undergrad years at McMaster. I eventually ran our peer support line. And that was so life-changing for me. Like, I got training on like how to be kind to other people. And then I was like, oh, maybe I should apply that to myself. That makes sense. And then my program at McMaster, the Bachelor of Health Sciences program, they also instilled in us a lot of great messaging around sort of, it's not about like an end goal. It's about the journey. It's about the process, growth, lifelong learning, all of these great things. And so like I had a lot of mental health knowledge. I was working in mental health at McMaster. And yet I still felt in me this like reluctance to seek professional therapy for all of my undergrad. And, you know, there's so many things that can go into that, stigma being one of them. But I think a big part of it is just a fear of change, despite cognitively knowing all of these things. I knew that I was able to work on some things on my own, and I was writing, I was talking to people. I wasn't sort of keeping my trauma and my story inside, but I was like, there was a part of me that was scared to access therapy because even if change is positive, it's just inherently scary. And I was like, oh, well, they'll make me be accountable to myself. What? I don't want to do that. I don't want to do that. And so it wasn't until after I graduated undergrad and I was facing other struggles with my personal life, interpersonal relationships with my family. And I reached a point where I'm like, okay, I feel like I've been working on a lot on my own, but I feel like I've hit a dead end on how much I can achieve and work through and grow on my own. And knowing all that I know about mental health, like I should access some care and some services. So in Hamilton, we have this great free service called the for youth, the Youth Wellness Center, which was excellent, wildly underfunded, I imagine, as many community-based things are. And it was free for those under 25 in Hamilton. And it was really great. I've had two therapists from there. They have a lot of turnover sometimes just because, you know, like what can you do? And they were both great. They helped me work through a lot of different things, but they were both white. And nothing wrong with that. They were super helpful, super engaged, super learning. And I really valued what I've taken away from them. But I found that a lot of my trauma and past comes from sort of cultural things that were put on me, coming from a mixed background, but largely my family's culture is South Asian, Pakistani to be specific. And there's so many beautiful elements to that, but there's also a lot that caused me, a lot of harm and trauma. And I was always afraid when talking to a white therapist of poorly reflecting my culture. I don't want them to think I hate all of my culture. I don't want them to have a negative view of my culture. I felt like I had to over-explain things as well. Like some things I did have to explain, right? They didn't just understand what certain terms were. They didn't understand some parts of my culture. So I'd be like, okay, so sometimes in Pakistan, this happens. And then I would get to like my bit. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but that was just a lot of work, right? And so when I aged out of that program, and I was like, okay, let me look for my own therapist. I went on Psychology Today and I went through a bunch of faces. Many of them were white. And I'm like, y'all are probably great, but nothing against you. And then I found my therapist now, who is a South Asian woman who has done a lot of work in trauma with women. And I'm like, yes, this
fits the bill. And I love what you're saying there, in that it can be, the first step can be Google Psychology Today therapists, Google your city or your community that you're in, read the bios, start to look for people who work in the area where you're experiencing things. Also, I'm by no means an expert in referring out, but at anyone who's listening right now, please feel free at any point to send me a DM on Instagram at Raw Beauty Talks. I'm not going to speak for the other panelists, but we're a warm, open group who are here for this community, who have all been through our own mental health journeys and continue to be on them, right? Mental health is something that it's not a one and done. Go to a therapy session and we carry on, especially in the world that we're living in today. So I want to say thank you so much to all three of you for taking time to join us today, for opening up and sharing so vulnerably. I really, truly believe in the power of conversation and simply speaking and talking about and sharing our different experiences, so that we are less alone, so that there isn't such a stigma around this entire conversation. For anybody who's listening right now, I'm curious to know, what is one sort of aha moment, one like gold star, one thing that you want to take away from this conversation today that you found valuable? I'm going to encourage you to write it into the comment section. I do this with my coaching clients. It helps us cement that thing that we want to take away. Write in the comment section, write it in the notes section of your phone. I also want to take a moment to say a huge thank you to the Canadian Mental Health Association team for bringing this all together, for working furiously over the last 2 weeks to find such an incredible group of panelists, and for supporting all of us. For those of you who don't know, CMHA facilitates access to the resources people require to maintain and improve mental health, to build community, and to support in recovery. They provide services and support to over 1.3 million Canadians, which is absolutely incredible. So many volunteers are pivotal in running this incredible organization. So a huge thank you to all of them. I'm going to ask one final question to each individual here right now, and that is, what is your message to the individual who is currently struggling with their mental health and feels like it's getting a little too hard? And we'll start with Jenni. It's a big, hard old question to just throw at the panelists, but speaking from the heart.
I look back to when I was at the worst place I could imagine ever being. And if I could tell myself that something, it would be that just imagine if it can get better. And it can, and do the work. I was so afraid of how long and what would be involved in getting that work done. And here, only 6 years later, my life has turned into a gift. And the work involved was a lot, but I not one part of me regrets a moment of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Beautiful.
So get help if you need it.
Get help. Get help. Reach out, ask, talk, speak to somebody. Asante, does anything come to mind for you?
Yeah, you know, I think for me, it's about keeping hope alive, no matter what. You know, if you read my writing, I write so much about hope and you know, a higher force, however you might want to define that for yourself. And you know, so within that, for me, it's, you know, one thing I learned in sports is, you know, I'm really into sports. One thing I learned from sports is, you know, in training is all pain is temporary. Which is to say that, you know, pain might last a day or it might last, you know, several years. But like Jenni said, if we work at it, we can work through it, and kind of come out on the other end. And another thing that really helped me too is, once upon a time I read this thing. Um, I don't even know where I read it, but it said, imagine someone who loves you more than anyone could love you. How would that person treat you? What would they say to you? What would they do for you? How would they be with you? And then to be like that person toward yourself. And that was really a game changer for me and really allowed me to finally, you know, love myself the way I needed to in order to walk through this world with my head high.
Love that. Love that. Thank you. Zeinab?
Yeah, so I think for me, it's similar to what Asante was saying, being kind to yourself and trying your best to love yourself. And I think we often struggle with like, well, what does loving myself even feel like? And to that, I say, think about, like, we always think about it like in our mind, loving yourself is in your mind, but I like to think of it as being in my body. So I think of someone or something that you love easily without hesitation. It could be a grandparent, it could be a pet, it could be a sibling, a friend, a partner, a lover, a spouse. Think about how you feel about them. Think about them doing something endearing, adorable. Feel your love for them swell in your chest. Feel that warmth, and think about having that feeling about yourself, and doing what you need to do to get there. That to me is like what I try to strive towards, in terms of self-love. And then the other thing is that when you're in a really difficult spot, and sometimes for people would say like a chronic physical illness or survivors of trauma, like there maybe isn't a quote unquote end point. I will always be living with my trauma. I'll get better at dealing with it. It may not affect me every day, but it'll be a lifelong thing. And that's really hard to accept sometimes. And you get really angry at the unfairness of it all. And I think for me, it's doing your best to do what you need to do to get through the day. And when you feel that urge to just sort of isolate from the rest of the world, like that isolation sometimes feels safer when you're in a really dark place, but it's not safer. And what saves us is our community. It's our people. It's our friends. It's our family. It's whoever your people are, finding them and leaning into them and taking that risk of saying, hey, I know maybe we don't talk about this, but I trust you and you're a safe person and I'm feeling like this, and thinking of who that person can be. And if you don't have a person, think of, there's phone lines you can call, reach out to a local CMHA and see what services they have to offer.
You have 4 new people right here, right now, who are all here. I absolutely love that idea of community. And I think this is the perfect note to end it on, to just say thank you to everyone who's tuned in today, who's listening. You're now part of our CMHA community. And please reach out, stay connected, keep talking, and remember that you are so, so worthy of love. All right.
You are enough.
You are enough.